So let's have a conversation. This is your coffee break. Hi, friends. I'm back again this week, and I have a guest that I'm really excited to introduce to you. I have with me today writer Jocelyn Glei. She is not only a writer who writes about work and creativity in the age of distraction, but also someone whose email newsletter I've become extremely fond of. So, Jocelyn, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Sarah.
Thank you for being here. Jocelyn has her tiny dog in the background who is eagerly anticipating the arrival of the mailman. So we might hear, is it a him or a her?
It's a him. His name is Salty, and he lives up to the name.
Oh, wonderful. So we might hear Salty barking off and on throughout, which is awesome. Jocelyn, I would love to start off. I would love to start off today's show with just a little bit about who you are and where you come from.
Yeah, well, right now I am, the mailman is actually arriving. That's what you're hearing. So
hello, mailman.
That should pass. I work from home, is what I do now, which is why the mailman arrival is like a big daily event. But right now I am focused full time on writing nonfiction, really sort of business books for creative people. I'm really focused on doing writing that helps people find really just more meaning and creativity in their daily lives and at work. And so I just had a book that came out last week, Unsubscribe. And before that, so I've been kind of working on the full-time writing for about the past 18 months, I would say. But prior to that, I was the founding editor and director of an editorial brand called 99U, which was really focused on kind of demystifying the creative process and talking to creatives and designers and entrepreneurs about how they made their ideas happen, and really kind of getting into the nitty gritty of idea execution. And so 99U was kind of an interesting brand in that it comprised a large conference we would hold annually at Lincoln Center every year. There was a book series that I edited, and then there was also an editorial website. So I kind of got to get my hands into a lot of different things. And before that, I was actually working at a startup called Flavor Pill, which is sort of a cultural media company, which still exists, and it's based in New York. I was actually their first full-time employee back in 2002, I think it was. So yeah, I was there. And then before that, I was actually working at some other small kind of web design firms back when they were still sort of called like interactive agencies, doing kind of like jack of all trades stuff. So kind of the through line for me is always sort of creativity and publishing, and, kind of culture sort of through everything that I've done.
That is such a lovely career. I think that a lot of people listening to the show today are sort of working on the balance between business and creativity. So I think that a lot of listeners today will come from the perspective of being trapped in a sort of business job when really what they want to be doing is working in a more creative field all day. So I love that you work in a balance between the two. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
I don't know. For me, what's been the most interesting is that the way that I've been able to, I think, find jobs that were able to be particularly meaningful and sort of fulfilling to me, in most instances was getting in on the ground floor of something, kind of being in something that was in a very startup state. So I don't mean like startup, like a tech startup, but just, a business in the very, very, very early stages. As I was just saying, I was at Flavor Pill. I was like their first full-time employee. And then when I was at 99U, I was essentially the first employee and the only employee for many, many years. And I think being in those roles really allows you to, kind of, there is no role, right? You're sort of shaping the job and you're kind of building the company. And so you're able to kind of become a part of the fabric of that company and what it means. And so I think for me, that's, and I had moments like when I left Flavor Pill, I actually went and worked at this like very corporate music company briefly in Los Angeles and hated it and like quit after 10 months and moved back to New York. But it was a great learning process because I learned that I was just like that sort of the corporate vibe and atmosphere was really not where I felt comfortable at all, and then I kind of took a little while, but kind of finding another more sort of startup type of setting. So for me, I think it's really interesting to think about, how you can kind of get in on the ground floor of something so that you can find something where you can really shape it in ways that will kind of tie in with what's meaningful to you. But at the same time, like I've just kind of recently shifted to trying to do writing full time. And I mean, I'll be completely honest. I'm not like making like a sort of like real full-time living at it yet. So I've just had my first book come out, right? So it's kind of to be seen, kind of how it does and what that means. But I had to, I'm 39 now, and I basically kind of put myself in a position where I set aside money, after working for kind of years and years and years, so that I could have like a year or two to try to make that transition into a full-time writer. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to make it sound, like it's just sort of easy. I think people, the kind of whole point of 99U when I was there was really to, demystify the creative process and talk about all the stuff that people don't usually talk about. And I think it's important to talk about that stuff, not just, because I think frequently you see people doing jobs and you're like, wait, but how do you actually support yourself?
Right.
It's really not obvious. So that's something I'm kind of, I'm trying to figure it out for myself right now in this kind of new, like more writing focused model, how that's going to work for me.
That's awesome. What made you decide to make that shift?
For me, it was just, much like you were kind of describing, probably a lot of people who listen to your show. I just always, I was an editor and a writer kind of in all of my jobs, both at 99U and Flavor Pill previously. So I did do some writing at work, but I'd always kind of wanted to do larger, richer writing projects. And I just never had time because I'm the type of person where I'm like always 110% into my job. Like I can't, be like 9 to 5 and then kind of forget about it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So I knew that I needed to, and I've done all different types of writing. I did a lot of creative writing in the past. I did like a sort of MFA in screenwriting while I was an undergraduate studying literature, so kind of short story screenwriting. And I never actually thought that I would end up writing nonfiction. That seemed like the last thing that I would end up writing. But kind of through my career path, I kind of ended up sort of developing more expertise in that area. So that ended up kind of being the natural fit.
You kind of made this shift to working from home writing. Is there anything that's just really surprised you that you did not expect about that transition?
I don't know I don't think there was much that I didn't expect. I think actually it was kind of learning that everything was sort of all of the things that I thought would be hard were just as hard, in fact, as I thought they would be, if not harder.
Fair.
But that's what kind of happens when you work in a job where you study the creative process for like 6 years. You kind of have no ability to sort of bullshit yourself any longer, which is kind of cool, kind of annoying. But I think for me, one of the things that was the most difficult thing about the transition was by the time I left my previous job at 99U, we had actually been acquired by Adobe. And so, I was working in an office with about 60 people or something like that. My team itself was extremely small, only 3 people. But in any case, I was working in an environment, right, where there's lots of accountability. There were lots of deadlines. There were lots of other people, right? And so to kind of go from that level of, I think both socialness and collaborativeness and accountability to, where you're working by yourself. And there's basically like a complete void of all of those things, because I also didn't do the sort of traditional route of writing a book where you write a proposal and then get the book deal. I actually wrote the entire book and then went and pursued a book deal. So I was kind of really on my own. And I think that was, so I had a period of, especially I think when you're in those big life transitions, I just had this, this sort of period where I kept kind of being like, I knew that I was going to write a book, and then I kind of had to decide, okay, well, which book was I going to write? I had like 3 different ideas, and so I sort of had this probably 3 to 6 month period where I kept being like, okay, this is the plan. And then I would sort of get into it for like a month, and then I would sort of be like, wait, is this the right plan? And then I would like kind of go into this existential cycle again, and then I would like come back to it. And, I think I heard this phrase that was, that kind of ended up sticking with me, which was plan the work and then work the plan. And so I've tried to kind of, ultimately I was just kind of like, okay, you're just going to have to like stick with something and stop this kind of all this like, existential angst about, is this in fact the right thing to be doing? So I think, that was hard kind of moving into that more isolated state. And also just you're shifting because you have to develop completely different habits, right? You have to develop habits of like writing most of the day versus, kind of working in an office environment where you're really maybe not trying to focus and write for 3 to 4 hours a day. You're probably certainly not doing that. So
gosh.
that was a big shift.
What is one habit that you've sort of picked up that's been good?
I mean, the most important thing for me is I try to just sit down at my desk and focus in the morning for at least maybe 3 hours without, if I can avoid it, without checking my email.
Yeah.
Obviously, my new book is all about email and, how much we struggle with it as a distraction. So I think just developing the practice of being able to, usually I try to write for first 90 minutes or maybe 2 hours and then take a quick break and then return to writing for an hour and a half, and I think that was, not surprisingly, right, that was kind of the most important basic practice to develop while, kind of resisting all of those things like social media and email that can kind of open up sort of a Pandora's box that kind of throws you completely off track.
Oh my gosh, yes. What does keep you focused? Like what keeps you from, the Facebook and the Twitter and all that stuff?
Well, for me, obviously, right, being, now that I'm focused on writing full time, of course, you have to cultivate, your sort of social media audience and your newsletter audience. And, you kind of feel like you need to be doing these things. So when you then have a project to share with the world that, hopefully someone will be listening. But for me, I use apps, like I use Buffer to kind of schedule all of that stuff out in advance as much as possible so that I can kind of sit down for whatever, 2 hours, one day a week and kind of plan out, all of my Twitter stuff and, any Facebook stuff and most of those other bits and pieces. So I don't have the excuse of saying like, oh, I need to be on Twitter for work or something like that. And then kind of using that, if I do want to check social media, just using it as sort of a reward during breaks rather than, something that I'm just kind of doing constantly while I'm trying to work.
That's a trap that is so easy to fall into. It really is. Kind of speaking of your book, I would love to hear more about it. And I would also like to ask about, I follow you on Instagram and Twitter and such, and I've seen marketing for your book has all these duck figures, and I'm very curious about this.
Yeah, well, we'll get to the illustrations in a moment. The book, which is called, it's called Unsubscribe, How to Kill Email Anxiety, Avoid Distractions, and Get Real Work Done. And, I said earlier that kind of all of the, work and writing that I've been doing is really focused on kind of helping people find more meaning and creativity in their daily work. And right now, we're living in this moment where there's so many apps and tools and different forms of technology that are competing for our attention on a daily basis. But when you look at the actual data and you think about what is still, kind of the number one biggest distraction that people have at work, it's still email by far. It's something like the average person maybe checks their email like 11 times an hour, sends and receives 122 messages a day, and spends about like 28% of their total work week on email. The Washington Post actually recently published this really depressing email calculator in which you could kind of calculate like how much of your career you would spend on email if you were spending a lot of your, sort of at the top end of the amount of time that people spend on email. And it was, again, I think it was like 47,000 hours that you could potentially spend over the course of your entire career on email. In any case, right, so it's a huge distraction for people. And so I was really curious to look at, on the one hand, like the psychology behind that, like why is email so addictive, and kind of dig into some of the science behind that. And then from there, then kind of move into looking at, okay, well, like how can we actually put email back in its place and let go of this idea of inbox zero and think about what are your real creative priorities and what are the kind of habits and boundaries that you can, set up so that you can make sure that you're kind of, limiting the amount of time and energy you spend on email so you have more time for meaningful work. And then kind of the last section of the book is like really tactical kind of tips and strategies for, spending less time on email, but also writing emails that will kind of get people to pay attention and respond in a world where everyone is busy and attention is scarce.
Yes.
So it's kind of it kind of tackles email on a bunch of different levels.
So now I want to hear about the ducks.
Oh, the ducks. Yes. Thank you. I was like, I knew I left something out. So the book itself, it's very similar. You have the previous 99 books that I did, Manage Your Day to Day being
Yes.
maybe an example of one. And those books are very, right, like they're sort of very small format. They were deliberately designed to be very visually appealing and also to be kind of set up in a way that feels very digestible and also very kind of compelling for a creative audience. So all of that was kind of deliberate in the way that we designed the books and the way that I edited them and all of those bits and pieces. And so, but one of the things I was never able to do was I always wanted to do books with illustrations. And so this one, particularly, if you think about email, right, it's like a really distasteful topic. It's like something we all struggle with, but it's not something that you really want to spend time thinking about.
Yes.
So, part of it was also kind of making the topic feel a bit more approachable and a bit more fun. And so I recruited this amazing Portuguese illustrator who I actually discovered on Behance, which is, the parent company of 99U.
Yeah.
And so we kind of collaborated, over many, many miles and many hours and kind of developed this strange, all of the figures are based on this sort of weird, like kind of duck individual. And, just did a series of really kind of fun, quirky, kind of zany illustrations that appear throughout the book. So it's like a very small format, kind of fun design book. So it kind of, hopefully draws people in and kind of makes it a bit more fun to deal with a topic that's, I think very unpleasant for many people.
I love that. I love the idea of making it fun. Even though I'm sure that the book itself is super informative and interesting and, very valuable to people as well. I love that you decided to do that. That's really cool. I love the work that you did with 99U. I love just looking back through your career. You've been, I think, a mentor, even maybe intentionally, maybe unintentionally, to a lot of people. Do you have your own mentor that you kind of look to?
It's funny. I actually think the whole subject matter of mentors is kind of an interesting one. Because I frequently talk to people or, read advice or all types of different things that are sort of like, I gotta, where people are just like, I gotta find a mentor. Like that's going to be life-changing.
Right. No. Yeah. Tell me more. Yeah.
I think that for me, certainly I absolutely have had mentors. I think when I had those relationships, I never, in the moment when the relationship was sort of unfolding, I never really recognized that person was a mentor. I never had them in that sort of role at the time, if that makes sense. So I would say Scott Belsky, who was one of the founders of 99U and Behance, was a great mentor for me, someone who I learned a ton from over the years. He's a super smart, incredibly organized, very thoughtful person. And so we worked together, initially, the very beginning of our relationship was actually me helping him as sort of a first line editor on his book, Making Ideas Happen, and then kind of launching 99U from there and working together on that. So we were close colleagues for many, many years, and I learned a ton from him. At the same time, I learned a lot from the other co-founder of Behance, Matthias Correa, who's the head designer, and we collaborated on the design of the 99U books, as well as about 1 billion pieces of different conference material for the conference over the years, like so many, the website, so many things. But at the same time, I think, one of my, colleagues and one of my employees, Sean Blanda, who later took over 99U for me, was also kind of a mentor for me. And I think, so to me, kind of the interesting concept about mentors is that I think that, if you're just looking for that kind of one end all be all mentor, I think some people find that, but I think it's pretty rare. I think that it's much more likely that you can find mentors kind of everywhere you look, people who are younger than you, people who you work alongside with, and also people that you work under. I think there's things to be learned from all of those different people. And so I think, to me, the idea of finding that sort of one person, almost like that kind of silver bullet to your professional growth, is a bit unrealistic, and also just kind of not taking stock of all of the amazing people who are probably already around you and who you can learn things from. Mm-hmm. But I think specifically thinking about the idea of how much you can learn from even, say your interns or colleagues who are younger than you, especially since we now live in this world where technology is such a prevalent part of how we all do our jobs. There are kind of constantly people who are coming up under you who know more than you about certain things just because they were, maybe more native to whatever types of technologies that you're trying to use. So I think it's interesting to think about how you can kind of take things away from those relationships as well.
Actually, I have several mentors myself, and I have one that I look to for writing, and I have one that I look to for business decisions. And I have one or two that are younger than me who I look to for, like you said, technology stuff. I look at them for style help, like just all sorts of things. It's just so nice to have this community of helpful people around you. So I love that you said that about not having one mentor as a silver bullet, because I think you're right. I think it is really rare.
Well, yeah, and I think it's kind of the same as, sort of finding a calling. You're sort of, it puts you in this sort of passive position, like you're waiting for someone's approval or someone's guidance or some lightning bolt from above to sort of, validate like what you're doing or make it easier to sort of be quite confident in the direction that you're going.
Right.
But I think that much more often what happens is, the sort of meaning unfolds through mastery, and as you get better at something, as you develop a deeper relationship with whatever it is, it actually becomes more meaningful to you. And that was very true for me, say with 99U, like I wouldn't have said, oh, I'm really passionate about, necessarily, I was always passionate about creativity, certainly, but I wouldn't have said, oh, I'm really passionate about like sort of productivity and like careers necessarily. But through kind of focusing on that, I did end up becoming very passionate about it. And it did become like very deeply meaningful to me. And so I think, there's sort of that notion that you are just sort of going to find your passion and pursue it, and I think a lot of times that it sort of unfolds, in fact, as you're pursuing something rather than, in the opposite way.
I've actually been having some conversations with friends lately who say, the big advice out there is to find your passion, find your passion. And I've had a lot of friends who said, I don't know what my passion is. And these people also feel like they're kind of stuck in their corporate jobs and they should be following their passion. What would your advice be for them?
Well, I think in those cases, I guess the kind of easiest way to, start to explore that is to, maybe do volunteer work or pro bono work that kind of leverages your skills, but maybe in a different type of area. Because I think there's a lot of sort of fetishization. That's a really hard word to say out loud. People fetishize the idea that you can make some kind of big mid-career transition, like you're a stockbroker and you decide, I don't know, you want to be a filmmaker, right?
Right.
And that can be done and like quite gracefully. I think you certainly can do that, but I think you certainly shouldn't, kind of underestimate the difficulty of doing that. And I do think that, it's more likely to be successful to make that type of change if you can kind of leverage the expertise that you already have, but maybe in a new way. So, maybe in terms of exploring that, volunteering or kind of working on, freelance or pro bono projects that kind of cast your current expertise, but in like maybe a new light or something that, also allows you to learn new things. Seems to me like kind of a more viable way, especially if you just kind of want to dip your toe in the water and start to see like, oh, is this more interesting to me or maybe this, as opposed to trying to come up with some grand scheme where you just like quit your job and plunge into something new.
I know that throughout your career, you've worked with writing and editing. What is your favorite thing about writing?
My favorite thing about writing. I mean, I think, writing is a way of thinking, right? Or figuring out what you think or clarifying your thoughts. So I guess that's my, favorite thing about it. I think that, we have this notion sort of that you often go into a writing project, like sort of already knowing exactly what you think about it. And I think that often happens. Actually, you kind of do think that you know what you think about something. But, in through the writing process, and certainly if you're trying to write something longer, sort of the logic and the clarity and the density of whatever argument you're trying to make gets kind of tested through the writing process, right? And you kind of, you kind of see where you're wrong or where your argument was weak or where you need to do more research or maybe where you came to one conclusion but need to revise that conclusion. And so I guess that's the most interesting part of it, is that the process of writing really clarifies your thinking.
Boy, I like that. I think you're the first person who's described that as their favorite part of writing. So thank you for that.
What do most people say out of curiosity?
So surprising themselves or when characters sort of start to come to life. So I wonder if that's something for you that's unique to nonfiction.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's, and I used to do much more creative writing. But yeah, the idea, whenever writers talk about that, and I'm a huge fiction reader, much more so than nonfiction, whenever they talk about characters surprising them, I'm always kind of like, really? How does that work? But I suppose it's the same thing, right? But it's just the same thing as sort of when you surprise yourself with the conclusions that you come to, which were maybe a little bit different than what you thought they would be when you set out.
Right, exactly. You know, you've worked so long in the field of creativity. What has been your biggest takeaway about creativity?
I think the biggest takeaway is that nobody knows what the hell they're doing, which is sort of a very comforting takeaway.
It is.
I really loved at the end of the third book we did in the 99 Use series, Make Your Mark, which is really, you know, sort of focused on building a small business and kind of thinking entrepreneurially. Seth Godin wrote an essay, and he says, you know, if you wait until you're ready, it's almost certainly too late. And I think that has kind of been a through line, right? Because I've done so many interviews with different creatives and designers and entrepreneurs, or heard, you know, so many talks that, that we curated for the conference. And, you know, I think all of those have very much been about the fact that those people just didn't know what they were doing. You know, they just kind of had the confidence to, you know, get up every day and take a few more steps. One of my favorite talks was by Sebastian Thrun, who is one of the founders of Udacity, the online MOOCs company, and also behind Google X, which made Google Glass and the self-driving car. And he gave a talk, and one of the things that he was sort of comparing creativity or any kind of innovation really to climbing a mountain that no one has climbed before. And, you know, he was saying, you know, if you're climbing a mountain that no one's climbed before, there's not a map. And so you don't know how to get to the top, and you kind of see the peak and you need to know where you're going, but you're not really sure how to get up the mountain. And so you take some wrong turns, but then you kind of, okay, that was the wrong way. And then you circle back, and, it's really just this process of taking 10,000 steps, and eventually you're going to get to the top, but there's never really nothing worthwhile in life comes with instructions.
And I like to tie that in with, you said one of your favorite parts about writing is figuring it out as you go. I think that's when we're sort of experimenting with things, we get realizations, and that becomes maybe some of our most valuable work.
Yeah,
is through
100%.
that pioneering. Yeah. What's next for you?
Well, I have definitely at least one more book that I want to write right now, which will be another nonfiction book. And it's really going to be focused on this idea of sort of mindful productivity, which sounds like a slightly weird phrase.
Ooh, yeah.
But I think that, you've probably read some of the writing on my blog. I think one of the things that you might have noticed I've been thinking a lot about is I think when we're now just in this world where we're all overloaded and overbusy and really just, inundated with kind of updates and notifications and requests constantly. And I think that we really need to sort of shift from, we're kind of in this model of like getting things done, feeling like we just needed to sort of be busy and be processing things in order to be productive and in order to be effective. But I think that now, in many ways, productivity is really becoming about what you don't do, about setting boundaries and about saying no and about figuring out how to filter out the noise. I think that that's really kind of the skill set that's really going to be a big competitive advantage for people in the future. So the kind of new book, the next book that I'm working on is really going to be kind of focused on, well, so what are those kind of, what's a way that we can kind of be productive, be effective, but do it in a way that is really sustainable. We're not going to be burnt out and completely spent and, 5 years from now and 10 years from now. How can we work in a way where we're resting and refueling along the journey?
I cannot wait to read this book. I know you haven't even probably started outlining it, but yes.
That'll be done.
Oh, Jocelyn, thank you so much for being on the show today. I just feel so honored to be able to host you. To all my listeners, I will have links to Jocelyn's presence on all sorts of different social media here for you. I'll have a link to her website and to her newest book, Unsubscribe. So Jocelyn, thank you so much for your presence today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. I'm just so excited to have you.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to chat with you, Sarah. Thanks so much.
Thank you. You have a great evening, and I will be in touch.